Now that we've violated every fire regulation in the county, we can begin. It's lovely to have you all here at the Humanities Center as we edge closer to the end of our 3-year exploration of natural landscapes and human meaning. Our theme this semester, as you may know, has been the city. And in today's session, we'll be reflecting on some challenges of city life. And leading our thoughts this afternoon are 3 splendid faculty members from USD's College of Arts and Sciences. Dennis Clausen is Professor of English and has taught at USD since 1972. Yeah. He was educated at the University of Minnesota and subsequently at UC Riverside, where he received his PhD. He is the author of a dizzying range of works, including novels, memoirs, and poetry. Dr. Clausen's 6 novels include the trilogy The Accountant's Apprentice, of which the final volume was published last year, and which has as its basis the problem of homelessness in Santiago. He's the author also of the 3-part Prairie trilogy, the first volume of which, Prairie Son, is told from the perspective of Dr. Clausen's father and was nominated for several national book awards. Dr. Clausen is also the author of Storytelling as Art and Craftsmanship, Practical Strategies for Screenwriters and Creative Writers. His regular blog, Small Town USA, appears in the pages of the widely read Psychology Today. Carlton Floyd received his PhD from UC San Diego and is Associate Professor and Chair in the Department of English. He's taught at USD for 25 years and is a specialist in African American literature, ethnic studies, and representations of children and childhood. He has written on the great playwright August Wilson, and most recently, with USD's Thomas Reifert, I'm happy to have here too, he co-authored the book The American Dream and Dreams Deferred, a dialectical fairy tale, published by Lexington Books in 2022. This book highlights moments when the American dream appears both simultaneously possible and out of reach, and elaborates a new collective dream of a better future built on socially just, multicultural, and ecologically sustainable foundations. Noam Chomsky, no less, has described Floyd and Reifer's book as, I quote, a wide-ranging, learned, incisive exploration of the dreams and nightmares of this strange society. Odilka Santiago is Assistant Professor of Sociology and co-director of USD's Urgent Challenges Collective. She received her PhD from the State University of New York at Binghamton, and her areas of specialization include urban sociology, housing justice, critical criminology, surveillance studies, critical race theory, ethnography, Black feminism and gender studies, and Caribbean, Black, and Afro-Latinx studies. Dr. Santiago did research on the policing, surveillance, and regulation of women in New York's homeless shelters, and she has worked with the grassroots organization Picture the Homeless on housing and civil rights for unhoused people. Dr. Santiago currently serves as a board member for Think Dignity, a non-profit grassroots organization in San Diego that serves and advocates for individuals experiencing homelessness. Her research has appeared in such journals as Metropolitics and Critical Dialogues in Latinx Studies. It is really, really lovely to have the 3 of you here with us today. So, speaking on the challenges of city life, please welcome to the Humanities Center Professors Clausen, Floyd, and starting us off, Santiago.
Hi. Okay, I'm gonna try to put the timer on because how's everybody doing? And so, sorry, I get oddly nervous about this. Okay, perfect. Just kidding. Wait a second. Timer. I want to make sure I'm on time. Yeah. Okay, so thank you for this opportunity to speak with such really established faculty in my early tenure. So I'm going to talk a bit about some of the ideas that are emerging from my research. In particular, I do research around homelessness, housing injustice. My focus is really on the shelter system, what happens inside the shelter system, how does it impact housing outcomes, but also what is happening in particular to those that are coming from different backgrounds, right? Because it's not a system that treats homelessness, homelessness is not uniform, right? For today, I'm going to talk a bit about the policing and spatial regulations of the homelessness crisis. And so I want us to begin with this a quote that I hold dear to my heart. It's from Stuart Hall and his grad students from Policing the Crisis from 1978. I know it's outdated, but it's actually not. And so when we talk about what is a city, I think it's important to think about the city as not this physical outside space that we just navigate through, but as an embodiment and also as a manifestation of our social relationships, right? As constructing the possibilities for, but also being shaped by our social, political, and economic system. And so it is something of which the city is this embodiment of wealth on the one hand, of great wealth and concentration, but also of poverty, of misery, of political unrest. And so crime is included in this, right? And so when we talk about the city, I think it's important that it is understood as having the manifestations of modernity, of the contradictions of capitalist economy and its ecosystem. It's very delicate in managing those contradictions. And then how it also is reflective of society and those division of resources. And so we're going to go into this a bit more with some specific examples. At the same time, where we see that there is power exercised in dynamics of the city, whether it's institutions, whether it's the layout of the street, it's also something of which embodies resistance. And so I'm going to talk a bit about 2 points today. One, I'm going to talk about the policing of homelessness in cities, and I'm going to talk about the spatial configuration that allows for the containment of homeless populations. Okay, so two things just in terms of managing. What do we think about when we talk about the city? There are conflicts in the city, right? One of the challenges: how do we manage the conflicts of the contradictions of capitalism in the city, right? So I'm really informed by an understanding that, one, the city is a space where modern capitalism was developed, right? It's a space of which was essential for the production of wealth and the wage laborer at the expense of producing unpaid, forced slave labor, right? And so when we talk about modern capitalism, and we can go back to 16th century, right? Which I'm not going to do. But we need to then look at how the city embodies that dynamic that is making possible the development of wealth and production of wealth is only possible through the development that of unpaid labor, whether it's enslaved labor, exploited labor, misery, torment, right? Privatization and brutalization. And so when we talk about what the city embodies, it embodies these contradictions, this dialectic relationship. And at the same time, it is doing so through the production of a surplus labor or reserve army of labor. So I'm not going to get into that, but this is something of which, when we talk about what is capitalism, it's this development of wealth because there is the development relationally produced of people that cannot be incorporated into that. So surplus labor is that population that cannot be fully incorporated into capitalism, right? This is how we build wealth. This is how we allow for exploitation of labor, the threat of this group floating, latent, or stagnant to be incorporated into capitalism. It allows for exploitation. It allows for surplus value production. And so when we talk about the city, we have to, and the challenges of that, we're talking about challenges of this regulate a diverse population of those that have different access to resources and those that are strained by this, especially during the economic cyclical crises that exist within capitalism. Okay, this is where we see structural inequalities, class divisions, and different access to resources manifest into multiple forms of violence. So this is violence that could be self-induced, whether it's using drugs and to self-medicate, or if it's through interpersonal violence, right, with other people, property, riots, voices of the oppressed, right, speaking out and being. And so the city is a really important place that reproduces these class inequalities, right? And so we have to think about the maintenance of capital and wealth being really a part of the reliance on this poor, this unincorporated group that is outside of capital, and that disparity. It's working always hand in hand. They reinforce each other, right? And so that's how we have the system reproduce. And I'm not going to go into it. And so this is a picture of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. I mean, this is a starkly different. You see that difference of wealth, right? And granted, not because it's, and we think of it as outside, but this is also existing within the U.S. New York City has one of the largest, has a lot of segregation in terms of residency and school districts. It impacts the rest of your life, spatial configuration. So when we talk about the space of the city, it is active in reflecting our system and reproducing the possibilities for our system, our mobility. So what? So it's like, okay, how are we going to, is this, like talking about the history and the structural contradictions of capitalism, is that really going to solve the issue of homelessness, right? This is something that a lot of political leaders, community leaders are really talking about today. We have the largest homelessness crisis that we have on record, which is a really small record if you think about it in the larger scheme of things, right? But how do we solve the crisis to homelessness? How do we solve this homelessness problem as it's made? And I would argue that given that homelessness is embedded in part of the political economy that begets more capital, it's really imperative that we do not try to solve it with a simple policy. Newsom, Tom Gloria, you're great, but this is going to be larger than just one policy, right? And so I'm going to talk about the challenges with the use of what is called coercive care or therapeutic policing models, and the use of spatial politics to reinforce this carceral containment. So, first, San Diego, like other cities, is engaging with this progressive enforcement, right? People have heard of this since 2023. San Diego is very much about enforcing this model called progressive enforcement, where police are now working with outreach. They're working to provide what is called coercive care therapeutic policing, which is providing resources to people that are visibly unsheltered and unhoused. In doing so, they will have 3 moments of contact. First, they will, if they encounter somebody who is visibly unsheltered, they give them information about a shelter. Upon second interaction, if they see the same person in the same spot, they give them a misdemeanor citation, right, a ticket. And if on the third time they see them, they're going to potentially arrest them, right? This is a punitive response. This is a way that some people might engage as tough love, right, to force people into shelter, into at least taking care of, right? And this is something that a lot of people really want. There's that app. What's the app with the neighborhood app that people call to complain? What is it called? Huh? Next door. There's another one. Get It Done. There you go. See, I wasn't ready for that. So, why is this important? Well, San Diego has the 4th largest homeless population in the U.S., right? And in doing so, this ordinance that was signed by Todd Gloria would make tents and encampments illegal in areas like parks, beaches, schools, transit stations. And so this would be this relies on the guarantee that there are homeless beds available. So 2022, San Diego had about 2,000 beds available for unsheltered people. But given the range of about anywhere, I mean, this is based on homeless count, anywhere from 2,500 to 5,000 people are estimated to actually experience homelessness in the U.S. The largest group experiencing homelessness today are experiencing homelessness for the first time. This is about 20%. Seniors that are 55 and over because their retirement is not enough money, right? Veterans and women with children. Okay, and I can go into that later, but I don't think we have time. But what are they policing? So they're generally policing what we call quality of life offenses, right? Or what some have deemed outside survival activities, outdoor life-sustaining activities. There are so many ways to describe it. But essentially, they are policing for non-violent offenses, right? And this includes loitering, encroachment, trespassing, panhandling, public urination, obstructing traffic, littering. And littering is an interesting one, right? Because you could be ticketed with littering for just having your stuff, right? Oftentimes, you might see somebody pushing a stroller or one of the carts from the stores that they were managed to push out, which is incredible that they can do that because that's really hard. But they're able to do so. And so in doing this, they are generally penalized with move-along orders, citations, tickets. And if they have a citation that is either unpaid or does not show up, you don't show up for the court hearing, you can get a warrant for your arrest. Now, why does that matter? Because this presents another challenge to dealing with the homelessness crisis, right? If police are people that are policing quality of life offenses, right? And at the same time, we're also now giving resources to individuals experiencing homelessness, what then is the option for those that are unsheltered? Well, I'll tell you about this later. So, the problem. There are more people that are unsheltered in San Diego than there are available houses at a time. And so it makes the anti-encampment ordinance actually unviable. It also presents the problem that we cannot also we cannot arrest if there are no shelter beds available. That's one of the caveats of the ordinance. Now, with this ordinance, citing and arresting unhoused people, there are actually not many people that got arrested. In just in the year, let me see, San Diego made about 61 arrests and 584 citations, but only led to 44 cases of prosecution, and which led to just short jail times. Now, when you are incarcerated, be it in jail or in prison, you would technically not qualify you will not be labeled as being homeless. So if you are somebody that is trying to get assistance, be it shelter, supportive housing, independent living, SROs, when you are in jail, whether it's waiting on a conviction or waiting to be arraigned, you will not be counted as homeless. And so you have to then start the process over. So homelessness and incarceration increases the chance of becoming homeless by 10 times. If you're incarcerated twice, then it's increased by 13 times. What we don't talk about with this new punitive response is that many people do not want to go, they don't want to be approached by law enforcement. They have distrust, and rightfully so. This is through, and they don't want to go inside shelters. And that's really my research. Like, why would you want to go inside a shelter, right? It's better than living outside. In many ways, the dangers of being outside and your health. Why not go in? Well, they have paranoia, they have bad experiences, whether they've been hurt, traumatized, and so what I'm seeing from more punitive responses, and let me be very clear, this anti-encampment law is not new, right? It's not new at all. But what we're seeing is the development of hidden homelessness, right, which increases your vulnerability to violence. That means you're leaving the spots that you normally will go for safety, where you go for resources. People are not homeless and just go and wander the streets. People generally have communities that they feel safe with. okay, that they look to for support, that they could say, okay, I could sleep here and I could rest, you know, and not be on survival mode all the time. Now, this leads me to this point. Now, it's not new. Since the 16th century, that poor laws have existed, and through moments of cyclical crisis, we see this punitive response from the state in managing the homelessness problem, right? Via poor laws from 16th century England that came over to the U.S., and through the criminalizing of idleness, targeting vagrancy, discouraging charity from giving alms, the use of fogging, the use and the force of labor into workhouses or houses of correction, right, where people had to work and to prove that they're worthy of getting any assistance from the state, especially if they were deemed able-bodied. And so this is really important because this is not new. We've seen this. This is a part of the system of which we are embedded in. So what does that mean? Whoop. Oh, no. And so I want to kind of show you one quote from one person I interviewed in 2023, who is a woman named Roberta. She worked as a home aide with elderly. She herself is elderly, 64, and she is, you know, sleeping from couch to couch. At this point, she has no home, but she also doesn't have an ID because she acquired so many tickets from the trolley, from not paying the trolley. She doesn't want to go and get her ID, her working papers, and even possibly she can get Social Security at this point, right, in her age. But she doesn't want to get that because she's afraid that she's going to have a warrant for her arrest and she will go to jail. And she's like, no, I'm not made for it. She has experienced incarceration before. She is not going back. And she's also an Army veteran. And so it's very interesting and important that we don't look to the police in solving this problem, right? I have another one I'm going to just pass by in the interest of time. So, if not coercive care and therapeutic policing, what are other ways of which the homeless are regulated? And the other way that we can look at it, and I can talk forever, but I'm not going to, is through anti-homeless design. And so I want you to think about your everyday walk. Go walk downtown. Anti-homeless design is really interesting when we talk about its impact and how technology, design, and architecture shapes how we perceive the world we live in, how we see ourselves belonging, and also who does not belong. And what's interesting about anti-homeless design, I'll just show you a few different examples, is that it has a multi-stable materiality. What does that mean? Anybody? Just kidding. It really means it's this philosophical concept that says technology and even has materiality has multiple meanings and uses and is open to many networks. It has a dominant stability, right? So, for example, this is a chair that you might find in New York City. It's a bench for sitting, but it also has other uses for it. Maybe, you know, you're walking, you're running, you tie your shoelaces on there. Oh, maybe you have a baby, you put the baby on the thing and change the baby's diaper. Obviously, I have no kids. You might also maybe stretch out on it. But what's important is that this multi-technology is not going to disrupt the primary use of it. It won't also disrupt the space, right? We're not disturbed by it. But this is an anti-homeless design because you know what? You can't live on that. We might find these little hook things under the underpass, right? This is anti-homeless design. It is barring people from being able to sleep and spaces, especially where they can be concealed and hidden. I'm sorry if you cannot see it, right? And so I had my students do this project in their Social 240, Crime and Inequality, where they got to go into two different neighborhoods, one that they were familiar and one that they weren't familiar with people, you know, and of course, and they got to explore. I learned so much about San Diego through this project. So I learned anti-homeless designs, you know, bench, a bus stop. A bus stop is an interesting place because you could sit there and you could also circumvent. You can sit there and act like you're waiting for the bus, but you could also just be there just to sit and rest, right? You don't have to be actually waiting for the bus. Sidewalk, right? Sidewalks where they are, where they aren't, that's a very political decision, right? So if you go to some places that have private property, you might not see that. Garbage cans, fire hydrants, right? This is another anti-homeless design. It's a chair. It has a dominant use to sit down, but you can't lay down on it. You cannot stay there very long. It's not very comfortable. It's kind of cute, I guess. What else? This garbage can, right? This is an interesting one because it is for the fact it's for recycling. What can't you do with it? You can't take the recycling out, right? Because there is that fear or even just the irritability of unhoused people, particularly, or people just taking out. Listen to that. Taking out recyclables, right? This is an interesting one. In New York, again, I know I'm New York centric, right? But you'll see these underpass where it's really warm in the winter, right? You might put up a bar for a bike, right? That might prevent people from laying down in there. You might have the chair that's like, not straight, but kind of curved in a way that makes it uncomfortable to sit down. And so what I see in this is that policing and architecture work together to contain, to produce certain spots where people are welcomed and then people are excluded, right? And they work in a way that produces borders of inclusion and exclusion. They produce hidden homelessness. This is done not even just through near formal policing, but also through move-along orders. People are vulnerable to interpersonal violence, and this also impacts people's access to basic resources, community, and also protection. People are not simply transient, right? People don't just wander around. People have places they go. They know where to go to get their to get electricity for their phones. They know where to go if they want to get food at a certain time. Unhoused people are very resourceful. That's been my experience. I've been doing ethnography for a few years. And so there is always resistance. So where there is power, there's resistance. And so where we see bus stops, again, you could sit there for a very long time. Nobody's going to know. Public streets, public parks, right? The public is a really important space that we have to always fight for, right? And I always ask students, I'm like, go and check if there's restrictions to go there at night. If there's a gate, if there's meters. What I found, and public toilets, which is a really contested issue here, okay? Because we shouldn't be having to pay for a cup of coffee to get, to pee. If you did, how much money would you spend every day? I pee a lot, that's why. So, this is recorded, okay. And so there's resistance to that, right? And so what I love about this work is that while there is structures of power, there's always resistance that we see in the cities. Cities are a place where collective action is taking place, public policies. I know I'm over time, so I'm going to just go a little fast. I took this in Penn Station in New York. These are little balls. This guy is just sitting on it, chilling. I was like, that doesn't hurt. That person's sitting on it too. People are incredible. But also down at 7-Eleven, you could also find anti-homeless design isn't just physical. It's also through noise. I found out that the 7-Eleven plays classical music as a way to deter unhoused people from staying out there. I don't know, does it work? But also it's kind of, anyway, I'm going to talk about that later. Takeaway. So in conclusion, policing and design recreate borders of inclusion and exclusion. It produces ideas of who is the public, who is the population we should be worried about versus the outsiders, who's deserving and undeserving of services. And so we reproduce that every day when we walk through. And so just to take note of that is really important. But at the same time, cities are sites of power contestation where we always negotiate that power or resist that power in constant flux so we can change it. It's not that it's there and we have to abide by this. And we should think about how the community should be in control of the space. What does that look like? And it will look different depending on each community. There are many housing rights achievements that I'm not going to get into, but you can see a lot of great, important works from people in the community, in the city. So thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see everybody here. Not sure what is going in. Do my best to run in second place. Thank you. That was incredible talk. Appreciate it very much. Give me a second to figure out how my computer works. Hey, there we go. I'm going to ask you, sir, to give me a nod when I start going beyond the necessary time limit. Fantastic. Hello again. The challenges of the city. No visual aids for me. I'm all you got. Hope you enjoy the view. From Dead Cities and Other Tales by Mike Davis, published in 2002. Chapter 17, Dead Cities and Natural History, begins with an epigraph from Richard Jefferies' book After London or Wild England, published in 1886. Speaking of London, Jefferies remarks, this marvelous city of which such legends are related was after all only of brick. And when the ivy grew over and trees and shrubs sprung up, and last the waters underneath burst in, this huge metropolis was soon overthrown. Mike Davis, a polymath, also described as a historian, follows with the claim that since sometime in the late 19th century, the largest share of energy under the control of the human race has been devoted to the construction and maintenance of its urban habitats. Even more alarmingly, he continues, the carbon metabolism of urban areas is transforming world climate, perhaps in processing the recent niche of moderate weather that has made super-urbanization possible, and which I suspect will soon make it rather untenable as we continue. Global change aside, there have always been compelling reasons to worry about the sustainability of big cities. The ability of a city's physical structure to organize and encode a stable social order depends on its capacity to master and manipulate nature. But cities are radically contingent artifacts whose control of nature, as John McPhee famously pointed out, is ultimately illusory. Nature is constantly straining against its chains, probing for weak points, cracks, faults, even a speck of rust. The forces at its command are, of course, as colossal as a hurricane and as invisible as Basili. At either end of the scale, natural energies are capable of opening breaches that can quickly unravel the cultural order. Cities, accordingly, cannot afford to let flora or fauna, wind or water run wild. End of a very long quote. Cities cannot stop these elemental forces from running wild either. This state would seem to be evident in virtually every recent city-centered disaster, ranging from recent earthquakes in Myanmar, where the death toll from buildings collapsing have reached a number well over, I think, 2,000 at this point, to the flooding in southeast Santiago in January of 2024, which flooded the house that I and my roomie live in, to the massive and many forest fires, or as they are called, urban conflagrations, I love that engulfed large swatches of the Los Angeles area around January of 2025. I might dare say that despite advances in science and fields such as urban planning, if one thinks of humans and their cities or any other form of urban landscape as in conflict with the natural world appears to have the upper hand, hands down. In short, while we encroach on nature, nature encroaches on us. It is not content to go gentle into that good night, if I might borrow these lines from Dylan Thomas. It can take back what we have taken if it wants to. I want to start with these notions and plant it first and foremost in your thoughts. The very title of this session and its presentations suggest precisely the kind of conflict or conflagrations mentioned and some others. On the challenges of the city as a title, summons to the fore notions of contestations, of conflicts, of difficulties, as the term challenges carries such implications. Challenges signify, quite literally, if one checks the term's synonyms, disputes, encounters, trials, and confrontations. If one amends the title to something like the challenges of living in cities, then a more apt reformation of the question might be something like the problems, concerns, or considerations that living in cities might bring. In one more twist of the title, let us also think of the challenges of living for cities. And here I am borrowing from a song written by the marvelous Stevie Wonder, if you can remember that gentleman, that entered our cultural atmosphere sometime in 1973 with a song called Living for the City. From his album Inner Visions, a summation of the lyrics might note the song's focus on a family in the city, the Big Apple, New York City. The son of this son is born in Mississippi in an impoverished but loving setting, has a hardworking mother and father who are nevertheless barely scraping together something one might call a living, and a daughter described as black and pretty, dressed in old but always clean clothes. Perhaps you can guess that this collective struggle is simply to graciously survive, to effectively eke out a living or a life while barely eking out a living, provides the gist of the song's message or meaning. To live just enough for the city can be said to mean to barely survive in the city. But the title here is not living just enough for the city, but rather it is living for the city, suggesting that their state of tenuous survival is not so much simply where they are, where they find themselves because of or even in spite of their efforts, but rather that they are where they are required to be, that their efforts are not for themselves, but rather for the city in which they reside. It is payment or perhaps even penance in what that city requires of them, the price they must pay for their existence there. A key moment or transition in the song is when the brother or son arrives via bus, part of the 20th century. Some of you remember, I'm sure, Trailways and Greyhound. I don't even know if they still exist, but I suspect they might in some form or another. And they're moving from Mississippi to that emblem of city life, NYC. We hear the young man say, "Wow, New York, just like I pictured it, skyscrapers and everything." For he is enamored with the entity and its entities before him, which were also already in his mind's eye. Of course, the young man, naive to city life, is talked into renting a package across the street for a few bucks, which probably seems a fortune to him, and is, of course, busted by the police and sentenced by a so-called jury of his peers to 10 years in the federal pen. The song ends with his release from one form of incarceration into another, evident in this admonition. His hair is long, his feet are hard and gritty. He spends the life walking the streets of New York City. He's almost dead from breathing air pollution. He tried and fought, but to him, there's no solution. Living just enough for the city. Yeah. Notable here is that he's not spending his life, but the life, walking the streets of New York City. The life that is a form of living just enough for the city. And while the song is sung with a sense of uplift, just a nice catchy tune, this sense of uplift is counteracted by the singer's plea that someone listen. I hope you hear inside my voice of sorrow, and that it motivates you to make a better tomorrow. This place is cruel. Nowhere could be much colder. If we don't change, the world will soon be over. Living just enough, stop giving just enough for the city. The city then in this frame is a cruel and utterly cold friggin' place in the sense of coldness that permeated slang in the 70s, as in, that's cold, man. Or that cities, or at least this city, is a mean, cruel, unfeeling, uncaring location. There are quite a few challenges in and of city life addressed here. Near poverty, the duplicity that life in the city may spring upon the naive or unsuspecting who enters there. a kind of cold callousness that pervades the city life of some. It is, in the parlance of this song, the coldest place on earth, if not beyond. And that callousness or coldness is not so much a result of the natural world writ large, but rather of its humanity or its lack thereof. Our inhumanity, which we are collectively charged with changing, or conversely, watching the world as we know it, if not actively, effectively ensuring its end, and thus our end. The transition here to we from they, from this family to our collective humanity, signals a plea that we stop giving just enough for the city. The family lives just enough for the city, and we give just enough for the city, which is to say that what some give for the city is far too much, and what others give for it is just not enough. I'm hoping that by now you might be asking why I'm calling out a specific place, New York City, while then also equating that city to the world. That seems a rather large leap. And yet New York City is one of the many cities that appear to have that appears to have and have had large swatches of the world's population existent within it. Beautiful things about New York, if you've ever been there, is they got people from every friggin' where that you can possibly think of. One of its nicknames is, in fact, the capital of the world, and another is the melting pot, a phrase and concept I have always found unfortunate, but that nevertheless signifies a rich past and present diversity, only ironically to inevitably become some kind of cheese fondue. There was and may still be a restaurant in La Jolla called the Melting Pot, by the way, which serves cheese fondue. How am I doing time-wise? I'm good? Fantastic. I am certain many other cities deserve our time and attention. And while I will turn to a few more as I press on here, at this point in writing this presentation, I found myself wondering, just what is a city by definition? And those who know me know where I go. I love language and I love to dig into it. The answers I found were surprising to me, and I thank you for that definition. That was a beautiful one. These are not. The answers I found were surprising to me in the sense that one may generally be surprised at how little we often know or consider terms that are commonplace in our vocabulary. So, of course, I asked whatever large language model Google uses these days to define the term for me. The first answer on the list of answers provided me was that a city is a large town. I'm like, wow, that's deep. Not finding this definition very useful or clarifying, I looked a little further down the list and found a city defined as, quote, an inhabited place of greater size, population, or importance than a town or village. And looking even further, I saw a city defined as, quote, a relatively permanent and highly organized center of population of greater size or importance than a town or a village. I am intrigued by the notions of relative permanence and importance, as well as the ideas of cities as highly organized places. And yet again, questions arise, particularly concerning organization. What does highly organized mean? And what or who is it for? And I think Odie gave us a little indication of that. What purpose does it serve? It is also worth noting that the term city is a derivative of the term citizenry, which I have a hard time pronouncing, but I think I got through at that time, meaning basically a group of people or body of people in a particular place. So one might question what challenges citizens might face in a city beyond these mentioned here. Still with me, people? Fantastic. I love it. I want to offer a response from another writer of note, Denal Mengistu, an Ethiopian immigrant to the United States, whose novel, The Beautiful Things That Heaven Bears, published in 2007, is set in another quintessentially American city, which is also, ironically, not just a city, but also a federal district, AKA the District of Columbia, or DC. The book title arguably defines this city, or at least the opportunities it purportedly provides, as the beautiful things that heaven bears. The sense of DC is never more glaringly apparent than in the following. And you know me, there's a little trick coming on here. Watch. The Red Line train bound for the suburbs of Maryland is delayed. The trains of this city continue to amaze me. Regardless of how long I live here, it is not just their size, but their order. The sense you get when riding them that a higher regulatory power is in firm control, even if you yourself are not. Behind me is an ad campaign for the Virginia Community College I briefly attended. The school's ad campaign and motto, I gotta love this, taking you where you want to be on the train, is splayed across the bottom in gold-faced letters tilting as if caught in a breeze. 4 students, 1 white, 1 black, 1 Asian, 1 Hispanic, are walking across the lawn, book in arm, smiling at one another. After 17 years here, I am certain of one thing. The liberal idea of America is at its best in advertising. Stefanos, the lead character, and his friend Joseph, also an immigrant from Africa, have taken a few classes here and there around the D.C. area. Joseph particularly seems enamored with a class he took on symbolism in Dante's Commedia, and with this following passage from Dante's Inferno, which seems incredibly relevant in this moment. Through a round aperture, I saw appear some of the beautiful things that heaven bears, where we came forth and once more saw the stars. While Joseph seems to be reflecting on his and their passage from Africa, Stephanos appears to apply the terms to their lives in Washington, D.C., as in one can see but not touch or reach what appears to be beautiful, perhaps even heavenly. And even then, what heaven bears can be read in multiple ways. To bear can be thought of as to carry something of substantive weight, as in beauty is effectively or essentially heavy, perhaps a burden even. Or it can suggest something that heaven must hold close, must hold dear, no matter its weight, something worth bearing with. Even so, that beauty seems always just out of reach. Eye candy, if you will. But nothing that can be touched, even though it may well touch you. The exchange, an expression of inequity. Something that if in a store, my mother would have said to me as I approached some object she did not want me to break, you can look, but don't touch. I know it wasn't just my mother. Something then forbidden to any additional senses of touch or taste. You can see it but not have it. Forbidden fruit. I'm okay? Oh, come on. For Stephanos, life in D.C. is precisely that. Bereft of any sustained or sustainable relationships, beyond his few immigrant friends, his dreams of college are unsustainable, his lovely and loving relationship with a young girl who moves next door to him, and his budding friendship and romance with her mother, both short-lived, pipe dreams. His store, a failing venture, despite his best efforts, as the neighborhood he lives in gentrifies. The price of housing rises, the neighbor's skin tones lighten, and Whole Foods, AKA Whole Paycheck, takes the block. And those who do not actually spend their whole paycheck there move in. Stephanos is condemned to a life of dreams about what might have been, as he states in his closing paragraph to his book, speaking of a store that is approximately 883 steps away from where he is positioned, that is deeply in arrears and subject to closure. He says, right now, I'm convinced that my store looks more perfect than ever before. I can see it exactly as I've always wanted to see it. Through the canopy of trees that line the walkway, cutting through the middle of the circle, is a store, one that is neither broken nor perfect, one that, regardless of everything, I'm happy to claim as my own, even though it is not his own, or at least will not be soon. This beautiful thing this beautiful dream that heaven bears, but the city does not, particularly if it stands for him as to the aperture through which he looks. I'm tired. I hope that's enough. Got about 5 more pages, but I'll send it to you if you want to.
So good. Oh my God, I love it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Well, fitting with yours.
No, I think no.
Well, first things first, in case you wonder why I don't use one of these, there's a good reason. I've never been able to figure this thing out yet. I've been trying hard, but can't get there. I know there's a comment that was made that I came here in 1972, and I see some folks out there who can argue that they've been here longer than some of these buildings. I'm the only one that can argue that I've been here longer than some of the hills that these buildings have been constructed on. Now the question is, how do I follow this? And the obvious answer is I'll dumb it down a little bit. That's all that's left. So rather than try to deal with this in a traditional literary sense, I have written a trilogy that also focuses on the homeless. Goes back to the year 2008. It's all three in the trilogy. All three novels are based on San Diego and set in San Diego. So I thought that rather than work with it in a literary sense, I'd take you through some of the discoveries I found in San Diego, some of the people I found in San Diego, as I and my main character, Justin, were trying to figure out what's going on. What the hell's happening here to this country we live in? So just a little background. I've written and published mostly small town stories. They're mysteries. I think one of the people who's read several of the books I've written argued that I have a mystery running through all of them, and that's true. I think that's what always drives the narrative. But it's mostly small town stories, the idiosyncratic characters I grew up with in these dying small towns trying to make something work in a community that clearly didn't have a future, but they kept trying. And I was really interested in those kinds of people. In about 2008, I decided, however, I wanted to try my hand at an urban mystery. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I had this idea, probably an old memory from Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. I had this character who lived in a small downtown studio apartment in San Diego, spent most of his time in the darkness playing with a Rubik's Cube, twisting and turning it, and hoping that maybe when he turned on the light, it would have solved itself. Of course, it never did. And that's about as far as I got in the story. And then a couple of things happened to kind of steer me in. I used some of that, but I also moved into another area. I had a friend who had to retire from this university because he came down with Parkinson's, and he moved up to Oregon to live with his daughter. And she called me a few years later, and she asked me if she could get her father down to San Diego, would I take him around to the places he used to like to visit? And of course, I told her I would. So she got him to San Diego. I put his wheelchair in the back of my car, and we drove to all kinds of different places in San Diego. We went to the Balboa Park, around the theater district. We went downtown, Every time we got out of the car, I put him in his wheelchair and push him around. And somehow, along the way, I realized I was seeing a part of the city that I'd never seen before. I had driven by it, but I'd never seen it. And what I was seeing was the homeless population that was always out there. And I was just one of the people who didn't see it. So that I worked that into the story, and then another thing happened that was equally crucial. I was reading an article, some old newspaper, I forget where, about a place called the Evergreen Cemetery. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. The Evergreen Cemetery is, pardon me, San Diego's version of a potter's field. And it's connected to the Mount Hope Cemetery. It's about 1.5 miles east on Market Street from downtown San Diego, and I decided to visit it. And when I went out there and turned into the cemetery, the very first thing you see across, there's a kind of a little field, and off to the right, you see the Mount Hope Cemetery. It's beautiful, celebratory, festive. There's colors, there's balloons, there's flowers, there's big gravestones. There's pictures on those gravestones. There's people among those gravestones. You go a little farther, and you will see 2 perpendicular rows of cypress trees. And when I got out, I noticed that the branches were either bungeed together or roped together. They look like big Christmas trees in a Home Depot parking lot. That's really exactly what they look like. And I couldn't figure out why. And I thought, is that symbolic? Because to me, as a professor, I immediately thought that. It seems to me it almost symbolizes the lives that are buried in the Evergreen Cemetery, that their branches were never allowed to spread and flourish and grow. And I thought maybe that's what it was. Maybe there are other reasons. And when I walked past those cypress trees and looked out over the Evergreen field, Evergreen Cemetery, I was looking at a weed field. That's all it was. It was a weed field. I don't mean to say wheat, I mean weed. And I decided I'm going to go out into the middle of this thing and just get a feel for what it is like to be among all of these people whose lives obviously didn't go right and who somehow ended up in this potter's field. Well, as you walk out there, you'll see indentations all over, and the reason for that is they are buried in wooden coffins, no vaults, and they're sometimes buried too deep. So, of course, the indentations in the ground sink. By the time I got to the middle of the cemetery and turned and looked around, I realized I was standing among 4,000 lost souls who were buried across these 10 acres. And I could still see over in the Mount Hope Cemetery the people among the gravestones, the flowers, the balloons, and here there was nothing. And I felt that I had found my story. I'm a great believer in what Eudora Welty said about place. She said the place is the story. If you find the place, you will find the story. I went back there many, many times when I was writing the trilogy, but when I left, I changed the concept of the accountant's apprentice. I kept my main character. He was still in his apartment. He was still in the dark a lot. He still had his Rubik's Cube. He was twisting and turning. But I had him take a part-time job with an elderly man in the same building. He was a driver, and that elderly man had a very mysterious past. He wouldn't give his complete identification. He said he was an accountant. but Justin should call him AC, which means accountant. That's all he knew about him. He didn't know if he was a advanced man for a drug cartel or whether or not he was something from another realm or whatever. But I wanted to create a more, I guess, even metaphysical context to the story so that it was not just a crime story. It became, more than that. I went immediately into the next book, which I finally titled The Return of the Fifth Horseman. And in this book, I made Justin an insider. He worked part-time in a rescue shelter, and through a whole series of defaults and whatever, he ended up as a director of this shelter. So there he is inside among the people that he never understood before, and even didn't even see that they're out there. And I wanted in this story to make the homeless individuals, which they are. They have names, they have lives, they have all of those things. And in the shelter then, he starts to have some nightmares of a fifth horseman that is joining the other four on the horizon, and he doesn't quite know who this fifth horseman might be. And he ponders all of that and thinks about all that. And I myself wasn't too sure at that point who it might be. I kind of kept it a little bit ambiguous. Then I had an incident that kind of helped me a little bit. And that is my wife and I went on a walk with Father Joe's village, a walkathon, over at Harbor Drive. And while we were nearing the end, she dropped out, and I decided to go the rest of the way. And what I learned as I was walking along, I looked off to my left, and I saw this very strange thing happening, I thought. There were 3 homeless people who were being led out of a cluster of bushes by a security guard, or I don't know exactly what his status was. The 2 men and 1 woman, were very ingenious. They had taken some irrigation tubes and they had tied them across the handlebars of 2 bikes. I think the flat tires were even flat, but they made them work. And then they had tied garbage bags containing everything to those irrigation tools. They looked like one hermit crab that had been dehumanized to the point where they were not even allowed to sleep in that bush and had to be escorted out. Now, that's only part of the picture. The other part is what is happening behind them. Behind them, very close, are yachts. 2- and 3-story yachts, huge yachts. The masts going up into the sky, way up into the sky. I didn't see anybody on them. I assume they probably were second homes. And that contrast between what was going on with these 3 people who had been evicted from a bush. What kind of a roof is that over your head? It led me to think there's something very wrong here. So I did just a little research. I'm going to have to go to my cheat sheet here. I'm not good at statistics, incidentally. I can do almost anything, but I can't handle them. I learned that in 2020, Time magazine reported that over 4 decades, $50 trillion were transferred from working class Americans to multimillionaires. 2022, the Global Wealth Data Bank reported that from 2010 to 2021, American wealth grew by over $80 trillion. $60 trillion of that went to the already wealthy 10% of the population. Other reports that I came across indicated that the wealth gap between the working class and the wealthy had never been so extreme since a very important year in our history, 1928. We all know what happened in 1929. The stock market crashed, doing a hell of a good job of it again, aren't they? You know, the cycle goes on, right? All of that kind of led in a direction. I didn't want to preach. I don't want to preach just statistic. I want to tell a good story. And the story, of course, was who is this fifth horseman, and what is he doing in Justin's imagination? There's more to it, much more. In the interest of time, I'll move on to the third book. The third book, then, I actually completed in July of last year, and there is a lot of the same thing happening, except it happens during the pandemic. I decided to do it during the pandemic. So Justin is facing a rescue shelter that's struggling to survive. He's facing a pandemic, more violence in the streets. He begins to question whether or not there is some kind of end time prediction going on here that we're not seeing, and it's connected to the homeless population. So he intermingles his work on the streets with people that are being called to, some people call him up and tell him to bring him in because they can't do anything with him. He receives a phone call from a bus depot, and the manager of the bus depot says he has someone down there. I thought that was mine. I wouldn't know how to turn it off, so that's a good thing. And he goes down to pick up this fellow, this homeless character, and the manager tells him, "We don't really know who this guy is. He just kind of showed up. One of the other people waiting for a bus said she looked away and looked back, and there he was. And the manager said, we call him Levi because he's got a pair of tattered Levi's on him. Catatonic, doesn't talk. So Justin takes him in, and this character seems to, in time, be able to communicate silently without words. And the question throughout this story is, who is this person? What message did he come with, etc. About the time that this was happening, I'm going to go back to San Diego now and the things I watch. When I would drive to and from work here at the university, I would always pass Baca Park. It's on Linda Vista, not too far from here. And I would always see this one fellow, very heavy set, wore the big poncho, colorful cap, knit cap on his head. And he was always sitting on a stone wall, about maybe 2-3 feet off the ground, playing a ukulele. And when I drove by him, after having seen everything about the pandemic on TV and in the newspapers, he lifted my spirits playing that ukulele. I started looking forward to seeing him. And then one day I drove by and he didn't have his ukulele. And the next day he didn't have it. And the next day he didn't have it. So I made a decision to go over and introduce myself. And I asked him, a little about himself. And turns out he had a musical background. But he also had worked as a bus driver. And he had fallen on hard times with health care issues and whatever. And I asked him about his ukulele, and he said, yeah, it was stolen. And so I drove home, and I told my wife, maybe we should buy him a ukulele. I didn't tell her I needed him to have that ukulele as much as he needed it, because I wanted him to be playing on that stone wall. Well, she said, absolutely. So we got him his ukulele, and I was able to drive by again and see him play it, and it really made me feel good. Then one night I'm driving back from the university, It's raining, pouring, dark, extremely dark, ugly night. And so when I drive by, I'd always look for him because he was the one person who stayed there all night. And he would always sleep in a certain spot. And I didn't see him, and I thought, God, I hope he's out of this rain. And I circled the block a couple times, and I saw a little bit of color over by a bus stop where there's a little overhang. There's a couple spindly little things holding it up. And as I got closer, I realized he was sitting in the bus stop, his shopping cart full of everything he owned, playing his ukulele while the rain is pouring down on all sides of him. And I thought to myself, that's the very essence of courage. What I tried to do in this trilogy is to make these people human, so others would see them as human. And so they would avoid some of the things that have been happening to them. I'm sure some of you have read, one person was stabbed with railroad spikes, another was set on fire, another was shot with a pellet gun. I could go back and explain why all of this might be, a part of our cultural past, but it's important that we see them for who they are. And I felt after 16 years of working on this, I didn't drive by them anymore. And I saw them for who they are, at least a little better. And I think this is going to be the most important issue of our time, is to see what we can do. So this was a project I took on, not because I felt it was right for me. I felt it was one I needed to do. And I'm glad I did it. So anyhow, thank you.